Right, good afternoon, and indeed good morning if you're joining us from the United States. My name is Daniel Edwards. I am a consulting director in PA Consulting. It's my pleasure to lead the Business Psychology Forum. And in these events, this is our sixth event, we explore some of the biggest challenges facing our clients and the big trends and through a psychology lens. And this event is certainly about a big challenge. It's all about how to be a global leader in an uncertain and complex world. So without stealing any more thunder, I'm going to pass you across to Rachel Brassey, who's our Global Head of People and Change, who's going to host this panel event. Over to you, Rachel.
Thanks very much, Daniel. Welcome to everybody who's joined today or who may be listening back to the discussion. My name's Rachel Brassey and I'm a partner at PA Consulting, and I lead the bit of our business that really does focus on people and managing complex change. And my role today is to help facilitate the discussion. But before we do, I'd like to briefly introduce the concept of leading in a VUCA world. So we know that in today's business landscape, change is definitely not exceptional. We're living through a huge amount of uncertainty. And the concept of living in volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, it's often called a VUCA environment. And this concept was first developed by the US Army in the late 1980s to describe problematic working conditions post-Cold War. And it's still a term that gets used by many leaders, particularly in the defence industry. And in light of events such as the ongoing climate crisis, the war in Ukraine, various energy crises, and of course the cost of living challenge, the term VUCA has now evolved to the term BANI environment, which also acknowledges that the world can be brittle, anxious, non-linear, and incomprehensible. Kind of regardless of the term or concept, one thing is for sure, it's becoming increasingly complicated to lead an organisation, whether in the private or the public sector in today's world. And in the face of growing complexity, strategy and prioritisation becomes increasingly daunting. I think moreover in an era characterised by ambiguity, interpreting evolving dynamics and reflecting these in your personal leadership choices presents an added layer of complexity. But leading in a VUCA world is more than trying to preempt and plan for ongoing turbulence. To succeed, leaders of large and complex organisations must also consider the similarities and the differences in cultural circumstances, understanding that one size does not fit all. But before we dig into these fascinating topics in more detail, I'm going to just pass over to our panelists now to introduce themselves. Adama, can I start with you, please?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Rachel, and hello, everybody. Great to be here. I'm super excited about this topic. So I'm Adama Ibrahim, and a little bit about myself. I'm based today in the lovely but rainy Denmark, and I'm also head of digital strategy and change management in our early research organization at Novo Nordisk. My background is in the pharma industry primarily, started my career in the NHS. Great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Tanya, can I come to you next, please?
Yes, hi everybody. I'm Tanya. I guess I'm another Nordic touch to this panel based in Copenhagen, partner in PA. I support our clients in anything that has to do with people and change and culture. I've been in this space more than 20 years. Originally, I have a PhD in corporate communications and culture, and I'm a certified coach. So I work with leaders and people across industries to make sure that we put people in the forefront of everything we do. I'm super excited about this panel, and my heart beats for everything that happens between us as people, intentional and unintentional.
Thank you so much, Tanya. And finally, Ed.
Thank you, Rachel. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ed Marsh. I'm another partner in PA. I work in our healthcare team. I lead our work on major programs and large and complex transformation programs, and so regularly work with our clients around some of the causes of complexity and what they can do to address them. And I'll look forward to sharing some of those stories with you through the call. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to our panelists today. So I'm going to start off with a really easy one. And my question to you is, what difficulties can leaders face when they're guiding organisations through a VUCA world? So quite a broad question. Adara, can I come to you first to give us your perspective, please?
Yes, absolutely. So there is a very interesting dynamic that happens when chaos is around us. And that is a real human dynamic around balancing resilience and control. So how much can you really fight with resilience, and how much can you really put into a box where your chaos doesn't affect it, or you could protect it a lot better? And this is the case with when it comes to leading people, leading projects across a specific region or even globally. And to put it into context, if the chaos, if the VUCA reason is something that actually impacts on people right into their homes, like the pandemic did, then you have to consider that your team are not only affected through the interpretation of how to manage their day-to-day work, but they're actually coming to work themselves affected by that, particular impact. So an example is, I worked on a clinical trial, a global clinical trial, where we had, I don't know if you guys remember one of the earthquakes that happened in Italy in the early 2000s in L'Aquila region. It was a very hard to get to region in Italy, very mountainous. So obviously the teams working there were physically affected in terms of their logistics of commuting and getting out of wherever they needed to get to. The hospitals we worked with were equally affected by how they could provide supplies to patients. So not only was the priority then around obviously patient safety, but it was also the team safety, making sure people could actually perform their jobs with the right protections around them and considerations and safeguards. So I think leaders have to recognize that this is a challenge that you face. There's the work context, and then there is actually the home context that you have to bring in to balance the two pieces that I mentioned.
Brilliant. No, thank you. Fascinating. And Ed, I think you've got some points that you wanted to raise on this. Can I come to you next?
Thank you. Yeah. So when I often think about complexity, and as a good consultant, we often try and sort of break down what that problem is. And we do a lot of work with the Cabinet Office, where we coach and teach on the project leadership program for civil servants and growing through their grades. And we often talk about two dimensions to this. The first is how clear, familiar, or agreed is the problem and the issue that needs to be solved. And then the second is a dimension of uncertainty. And in fact, just going back to Adama's point, we also refer to the brink of chaos, which is where you have an ambiguous world that people don't understand, and you're living in a period of uncertainty. But the reason that we break that down and looking into those causes is because we believe that we can treat them quite differently. If something is unclear, or if it is ambiguous, and if it is just that people haven't experienced it, simple things like stories, simple things like proven methodologies, structures, and processes to carry people through so that they can learn from other experiences and digest and break this one down are often one of the key dimensions to help. In terms of uncertainty, those things aren't in your control. And unfortunately, no matter the methodology that you might be applying, you won't be able to address it. And I think the thing that we look for here is, how do you break something down, often in a more agile way, so that you focus on the things that you can do now, and you focus on the things with no regret and start to make progress, and then gradually solve that larger, greater complexity as you go through time. So my two dimensions and two ways to sort of go after both of them.
That's really interesting, Ed. And I think interesting that you started to talk there about agile. and the need to be agile and focusing on what we can control versus what we can't. Which takes me into my next question, which is around the qualities, and what kind of qualities should leaders really strive to emphasize or adjust when they're leading change across different cultures, because clearly this is not a uniform experience. Tanya, can I come to you to share your thoughts on that?
Sure. So I think there's no doubt when we talk about volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, that the impact is very different depending upon where we sit. Just take the Nordics compared to UK. I think there are huge differences as of how this is experienced. But we cannot not be impacted. And I think one important thing as leaders is the curiosity as of, how does this feel? How are you impacted? I think sometimes as leaders, we can be obsessed with the future. We can be obsessed with motivating people, driving people forward. We've learned that we need to acknowledge the anxiety, but only in order to go into the positive future. I think today we really need to embrace the ambiguity. We really need to embrace those feelings of fear and anxiety, and allow them to be part of the journey, so they go hand in hand with the excitement and the eagerness to move into the future. So rather than thinking that it's something we need to acknowledge and stop away, it's really something, the good and the bad goes hand in hand in another way than previously.
Absolutely. And one point I just wanted to emphasize here is that for those of you listening, we do have a Q&A function that you should be able to post any questions or comments that you may have, and that you might want me to pose to our panel. So please feel free to stick something in the Q&A function if you've got a specific question you'd like us to go deeper on or address, or a comment, and we'll be able to pick those up and weave in through the course of this. So thank you, Tanya. Adama, can I come to you next in terms of those qualities?
Yeah, I think this is such a great question, specifically because if we unpack, what leadership truly is, modern day leadership especially, in my opinion, it's setting out a vision that people can recognize and follow and be passionate about. It's removing obstacles and more importantly, is taking responsibility for helping people be the best that they can be. And so with that in mind, when you have a VUCA environment or some kind of situations that are outside of your control that significantly impacts your business, and that view of success, whether it's for the team or the individual or the company, then it's important, I think, for the leader to take on even more of a serious leadership position. So leaning in even more to become more empathetic, so recognizing what people are going through and feeling it more than they are, much more, because that's the only way you can actually be ahead of the solution. So it's not a reactive stance, it's more of a, how do I feel so much that I need to anticipate the next feeling, going with Tanya's example. And I think from a cultural point of view, that means different things in different cultures, and I'm talking specifically about geographical locations. So the reactions you expect to see in India is different to the reactions you will see in the US, and certainly the reactions in Denmark. So I would like leaders to understand, specifically on this call, that you have to then really factor and layer in that cultural dimension of people's natural states, because we become more of our, that Maslow's hierarchy of need kicks in harder when we're faced with difficult circumstances. And our ugly side usually comes out much more than the good side. So bearing in mind that there are cultural interpretations of how people react and respond and the right buttons to press, it might be that when there is a tricky time going on in India, you need to become more American with them, and I'm just using this as an example as a leader. And then in America, when there is a tricky time, actually, you might need to be more Indian with them, because empathy goes a long way in America when there is a problem. And clarity and directness probably goes a long way in India, where there is a problem. So I think that's the flexible hats and multiple hats that leaders need to be able to wear. And it's not natural to people, because if you're of a different type of personality yourself, then you have to really dig deeper and bring out the right personality that's needed for that reaction to be effective. So that's my thoughts.
It's quite exhausting. And wearing all those different hats, leading effectively, where you're in a really complex, volatile situation. You've got a multinational audience potentially, leading across different time zones, different local situations. It's not easy being a leader in the VUCA world. That is for sure. Thank you for that. I guess just trying to dig a little bit deeper on these qualities. And when you think back in your own experiences, what does it look and feel like when leaders get this right? As well as what does it look and feel like when leaders get this wrong? Which I guess is, inevitable. And you could say it becomes a very rich learning experience at that point. But Tanya, can I come to you just to perhaps share any of your experiences of when a leader has got it right or wrong?
Yeah, definitely. So I think it's old news that the know-it-all, do what I do, say what I say, look like I look, leader is long gone. But we sometimes, I think, with the eagerness to be motivational and delegate and coach as leaders, sometimes there's a risk of not leading. And that is just as wrong. And it's actually touching upon what you're also saying, Adama. So I think there's really, we need leaders, and we definitely need leadership. So when we get it right, it's leaders that dare make decisions, knowing that you are doing it on a fragile foundation, that you don't have all the data, or you have too much data to actually navigate, but still daring to take a decision. It's also leaders, you talked about the physical safety, but it's leaders that get it right creates the psychological safety, which is and the physical safety, so both. And then there's something around accountability or daring to instruct. I think we've been a little bit scared of leading for many years, but really daring to provide directions, to tell people how to prioritize or how to navigate, and maybe do it in a compassionate way, of course, not the old-fashioned way, but still daring to have an opinion. And then it's old news maybe, but still very difficult. Leaders that has the confidence of making mistakes, and the confidence of sharing when they do so, and the confidence of using it as learning opportunities. I think those are the leaders that get it right. So really taking the best of the old world and the new world and bringing it together.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tanya. Ed, do you want to come in here as well around the qualities that you see when leaders get this right or wrong?
Yeah, and I think Tanya spoke there a lot to a really powerful dimension around the emotional side, and particularly about how it feels to be led in some of these. And there's also a very rational side to that as well. And so I think to one of the really positive learned behaviors that I think was very different through a lot of the COVID responses that we saw in the UK. And that was very much about setting a bold ambition and then working out how you can manage and what you can measure. And quite often we've seen things about left to right plans that go off the end over there, and people have lost interest after the first phase. And what looked and felt different there was not measuring, whether this milestone was complete or whether that process had been resourced and the activity was live and the dependencies between them. But what was the outcome and the effect that we were looking to have? How are we going to get 50,000 test kits into Liverpool by next Tuesday? And by the way, that was on Thursday. And once we get them there, how do we make sure that people use them? And what's our evaluative approach to that? And that's a different conversation. And so for me, some of this is about making sure that when you're leading it, that you understand the outcomes that you want to have, what's good and bad about them, your indicators that you're progressing along the right way, and then clearly the measures of success around them. So I think brilliant that we focus on the emotional side of this, which is really what gets people behind it. And I think that rational sense then helps to bring some of the structure to manage particularly things like uncertainty.
That's great. And we're getting a little bit of feedback from our listeners, which is fantastic. So a comment in around, VUCA requires a willingness to be flexible, whilst at the same time having a clear line of sight to the objective of whatever the transformational change is that you're pursuing. A question in: two qualities of a good leader in a VUCA environment are calmness and maintaining impetus without creating inertia. How should leaders respond when context or stakeholders demand or expect a rapid response or instant problem solving, also known as waving a magic wand? Would any of you panelists care to respond to that one?
If I can just pick up quickly on that last example, some of this is about being real about what you can achieve with what you've got, and a sophisticated way of looking at this can be what needs to be true to deliver that outcome, particularly when that magic wand gets deployed and the extraordinary gets asked. I think in those environments, it is explaining the things that are within your control to be able to deliver. And then identifying either a change in who else might come into the party. We're increasingly working in collaborative worlds. That example that I had in COVID, by way of example, that required extraordinary levels of collaboration between what became the UK Health Security Agency, local authorities, police, the armed forces, and military aid. And those were combinations that are very rarely configured together. And that was all about looking at what's that dependency? What are the different ways of doing this? Who can do it? And can we pull it off in time? So a bit of challenging convention in there, being really clear on what you can and can't do. And if you put forward something that you can do, making sure that you're absolutely confident you can get there.
Always that's for
If
sure.
I can just add,
Please, Tanya, come in.
to what you're saying, because I think it's a very important point around here is, you intuitively ask yourself, what should I answer to this request? But I think that's the wrong question. You need to ask, what should we answer to this request? And how do I ensure that I get the right brain power into solving this challenge, rather than thinking about what do I as a leader personally think? Because the know-it-all leaders, I just said, is gone. There's no way that we can provide the answers ourselves any longer.
Yeah, just a real quick one for me. Regards to the last question, working in a very regulated industry, there is no such thing as uncarefully thought through action. We have to be super compliant. And so what we typically do is we build on the learning. So if we're experiencing a new situation that we've never experienced before, then I guarantee you at the end of that, there will be guidelines on such an experience should it happen again. And typically what you find with these types of new, chaotic, out of control situations is there are flavors of it that has happened before. And I guess this is the certainty about VUCA. It is here to stay. It isn't going to be a one-off. It will happen again and again and again. And there is therefore a path that you can take that is predictable because you've experienced it before. Of course, every situation is different, every individual is different, context is different, but there are very commonalities around the foundational aspects of the first step and the next step, whether it's with Agile, like Ed mentioned, or whether it's really considering the human side, as Tanya was double clicking on, that you could really pull through. And so long as you are an organization that learns from previous, experiences and documents it and trains on it and has that continuity so that whatever happens, you have a business backup plan. If your servers go down, you have plan B. There is so much that you need to do to protect. Unfortunately, this is the way how we live now. We have to put these guardrails around us to protect us from a potential whatever that happens in the future. So that's how you respond to it, being proactive and thinking ahead this can happen, therefore I get ready now, not react all the time. But if you do have to react, then the one thing to say is there needs to be very significant expectations and stakeholder management, where you should absolutely expect to have high tension, high conflict, and you need to put in the effort to really neutralize and bring some common ground. And the important thing is to see the solution as a joint effort and not one-sided. So there are no finger pointing and you did this because of the high emotional state. It has to be owned, and it has to be something that people can really see themselves in, you know, so you do this, I do this, you do this, and so on. So I think that way of managing the problem together really brings that common ground in terms of an instant reaction.
Thinking about resilience and leaders planning for things that perhaps even a few years ago we thought, you know, a global pandemic, no, that's sort of a fictional thing, and yet there we were. The world was turned upside down for at least 2 years. Do you think that, you know, based on the panel's experience, that leaders recognizing that the unthinkable can happen are building better resilience into their organizations? And obviously this isn't all about resilience for this conversation, but recognizing just, you know, what you just said, Adama, around learning and taking those learnings forward when future changes and future shocks, things happen. How well do you think leaders are embracing that so that they do build greater resilience into their organizations?
Yeah, so I guess maybe I can just continue that conversation just to say that effective leaders self-reflect constantly, and they always monitor themselves and go, did I approach this the best way that I could after the fact? So that's how I expect people to behave regardless, whether it's a VUCA situation or not. And in this particular context, we actually don't have a choice. So what I'm observing is a lot of companies, especially following COVID, have created this future-proof task force, you know, to predict the next COVID and actually understand what type of impact it will have on the company. So whether it's geopolitical, whether it's environmental, you know, disasters, whatever, how can the company survive through that? Because the COVID response was not planned in many cases, and it was hurtful, actually. We've seen the economic repercussions of it, you know, downstream. How do you then plan to future-proof yourself from such, you know, unexpected situations? So I've seen business strategies being created to really apply that thinking, which never existed before, was never taken that seriously. And so those risks are mitigated almost immediately. And that's something that's important, whether it's with front-loaded investments, whether it's with secure financial management, or whatever the concept is that the company cares about or needs to protect the most. I think that's what I'm seeing top down at an individual level. And somebody mentioned, I think, Eva, in the question around middle managers. What is really important for middle managers is to make sure that they fully have visibility to what the company is doing, because that has to trickle down consistently. And if it isn't happening, they need to ask the right questions, because if the company is protecting everyone, then that includes them and it includes their teams. So it's everybody's responsibility almost to seek this out if it's not happening, and just be able to understand, you know, what are the limits your company will go, what is available to you, and then use that to support your teams and also obviously do a good job.
Some sage advice there. Tanya, over to you. Sorry.
No, but I think there's another trend we see is leaders looking into the organization and rethinking the operating model, rethinking their supply chain, rethinking the people and the succession planning, because there's definitely something about how do we, I think for many years, the primary focus had been efficiency and cost. And now I think many organizations are looking at, so how can we ensure that we're not dependent upon one person, or dependent upon one location, or dependent upon one organization. So there's another, you know, resilience being built into the operating model that we've seen prior to COVID. And in that way, resilience has definitely become a design criteria as well.
Yeah.
And Rachel, if I some of our clients look at the advantage around some of this. And in our transport team, they've recognized that there can be advantage to always being on if you can manage that resilience. And some of the thinking and the lessons there are around, firstly, that mindset, making sure that there is the capacity, the right skills, the right behaviors, as Adama and Tanya referred to there. The second is about, what can you take as muscle memory? What are those simple and new things that you might need to just form new routines around, so that actually you don't consume your capacity in things that are the new normal, the new routine, and repetitious activities. And the third, and we've touched on this already as well, is looking for the different ways through resilience and looking at the different collaborations and that wider ecosystem that you can look into. And so I think of that resilience as having multiple dimensions, from that personal resilience, that mindset, the operational resilience, and then the wider resilience that you might be able to get access to as well.
Absolutely. I'm just looking for any more questions. So I guess looking at Adama's point there, to what extent have we seen a change to leaders developing or building or strengthening that self-reflection muscle? So clearly, self-reflection isn't a new thing, but do we see it as a more practiced activity in the context of VUCA? And open to anyone on the panel.
I mean, I can have a go. I can definitely share from what I've seen in the past decade, at least. There is a bigger emphasis on a new style of leadership, that's for sure. I've seen this across 3 companies now, and there is definitely a more gentler way of leading, which really aligns better with self-reflection. So gentler meaning it's not directive, it's more empowering, it's more servant leadership based, it's more visionary, much more. We need to transform, we need to always, look beyond ourselves. And I think that in itself inspires people to constantly look inwards and go, have I got what it takes to do what I'm asked to do? And that's part of it. So you don't have to call it self-reflection, you're actually doing it. So when you then step into the shoes, so the last company I was in really emphasized servant leadership as the way forward in innovation, where you serve yourself, you serve your teams, you serve the project, and that's really important. By serving yourself, it means you have to get better, you have to improve, you have to learn, and learning is part of the learning journey is self-reflection, to go, how did I do the last thing, what was missing? So yeah, I am definitely seeing a trend, in that direction.
That's really interesting. And do you think, in terms of just following up on that, Adama, and Tanya, I'll come to you, is around that the importance of that within the VUCA context, so recognizing that VUCA is not usually a one and done, it's an ongoing way of life for many of us, and certainly it feels like that in the world right now, and has been for some time. But in terms of that servant leadership model and self-reflection, and how important is that in a VUCA context?
It really is, because servant leadership is all about leading with empathy and considering the other person first. So there's a lot of stuff that Brene Brown had written on this topic, which if people want to pick it up, they can actually start to understand a little bit more about it. It really is about listening and understanding, the other person's point of view. And that is exactly what happens when there is chaos and stuff that's happening fast and in a way that that makes people uncomfortable. You need to then step outside of yourself for a second or two, and as a leader, and really start to consider your team's emotions and what they're going through, and how to then adjust it into a productive way of working. As Tanya was mentioning, if you have to shift an operating model, which is what happened with COVID, in a week or two, if you don't even have the time to kind of sit down and do the 10 million design workshops, you really have to react almost instantly. So that is uncomfortable for many people. It's a tricky one. So leaders are having to build that resilience, build those skill sets, but not when the situation happens, before it happens. Yeah.
Thank you, Adama. Tanya.
Yeah, but I think there's definitely something, living in VUCA world, there's something about humbleness So coming from a time where we were on the top of the world and in control, as both you, Ed, and Adama have been talking to, now we are living in chaos. And I think everybody knows that we do not know it all, and there are forces around us impacting us in ways that we cannot foresee. So I think that humbleness is new. And I think it's fostering self-direction on many levels. So it's not just self-reflection as of how do I individually perform as a leader. It's also self-reflection on a team basis. Are we good enough? Are we doing the right thing? And on an enterprise level, are we doing the right thing? So I think this self-reflection is something that we are doing today on many levels in another to another degree than we used to.
I've got two observations to that, which aren't as closely linked together in practice as I feel that they could. And the first, again, just picking up on Tanya, some of your points there, a different lens on some of that is the humility, and the humility to know when you need some help and to know when you're uncomfortable, to know when you're listening and need to actively look into that. I think in a world where leadership can be perceived by some as providing clear direction, that's uncomfortable. And I think the more that all parties can do to familiarize each other, that humility and playing to your strengths and the wider collective strengths to plug some of those gaps is a powerful thing. Related, but not quite linked enough, is in an increasingly digital world, I think we've done a lot to learn from user experience and service design and developing personas and understanding the different dimensions of what people need. And just thinking practically, in one of the examples that I've recently worked on, we moved away from thinking of conventional segments of, in a hospital environment, nurses and doctors and administrators, to also recognizing the other dimensions of parents and caregivers and those who would recognize themselves in the neurodiversity community and of course ethnic backgrounds and the links into health equalities. And those are equally important characteristics that need to be factored. And so just coming back to the point on self-reflection and building and strengthening leadership behaviors, I think there is a consciousness of the need to address these, and I think more effort is going into it, but it's still not quite intuitive in some areas. And I think one of the increasingly important considerations that leaders need to factor in leading going forward.
Yeah, and I guess just leading on from that, we're getting a few more questions. I'm just looking in the question box. So we've got one here. Having been in the same company as Adama, I actively practice 21st century leadership techniques, including specifically self-awareness. It was an active practice assisted by the company. The question, I suppose, is how to do that practice so it truly changes. Anyone care to respond to that one?
I can have a go, and that's an interesting question. Thanks, Tim. I would say that the self-reflection is an art and a science, and it is something that you aspire to convert your situation from who you are now to who you need to be in the future. I think that is the key thing about self-reflection, that there needs to be a significant shift in that particular context from here as is to the to-be state. And the to-be state is where you need to be. So this is why we use the example of where are my gaps, when you go through a situation, where are the gaps that you were trying to address that from that previous experience you need to grow into and get better at. So that's the to-be state. But in terms of leadership overall and using that practice to advance your general leadership, then having, in fact, there's something powerful, and I think Tanya mentioned this a little bit, and so did Ed, about a team understanding how vulnerable their leaders are. there's something hugely powerful about that, because they actually empathize with you. You know, so and when it becomes a two-way street during a VUCA situation, then the team has come together. Right now, we're obviously supporting and promoting that the leader is the one with the empathy and the leader is the one that cares. But when you have a team that actually does this back, they care about you, they care about the company, they care beyond themselves, I think that's a higher level of performance in crisis. And it's important that you practice self-reflection and be open about your vulnerabilities vocally to your team, to go, I'm not good at this, I did this, I messed up, and I'm gonna, you know, figure this out. Or this is what these are the actions I'm taking. And I think it goes a long way. So that's generally how I see it. That yes, it is slow, yes, it's transient and sometimes intangible, but ultimately it's the as is the to be, and also getting people to self-reflect with you. That's the real power of it.
Thank you, Adama. I've got another question here, which is, Tanya read, what are the early warning signs that leaders are not coping? Ed, I don't need any feedback, thank you.
I think they can be thick and varied. I'm also thinking about some of the extremities in this as well. I mean, we've spoken a few times here about COVID, and I think back to some of the leaders that I've worked with there. And in retrospect, I think that actually some of the experience that they went through, I would define as traumatic for them. So my first observation is that is a scale with quite a long dimension. I was going to sort of give some examples, but actually I think it's just things that are not normal for that person. And I think it is just different behaviors. In the example of, in the example just going through my head, I would normally meet with somebody who would be absolutely resolute in terms of driving clarity into something and getting certainty of the three things that we need to do. But in this environment, wasn't able to do that, wasn't able to let go of one of the points in case it was wrong. And that's a sign of, I think, that challenge in the example that you put. So rather than specific traits, different people will respond in different ways. And I think how, again, we collectively recognize that and check in and have the humility, again, to collectively check that we're all okay, that we're all on the same page, that somebody else shouldn't step in and how we play to strengths is a sort of memory that I take away from that.
Tanya, anything else you want to add in, or we can go to the next question?
No, but I totally agree. It's the out of character that's important.
Yeah. So next question is, how can leaders ensure an outward curious view when they're under pressure and tempted to focus on micromanaging?
So is that for me?
Any one of you?
Yeah, no, but I think this is real. The challenge here is real, right? Because this is something that we are facing on an everyday basis, that we have to look into a future that's ever changing and make strategic decisions that will impact in the long run, while being hit in the head, making sure that the daily operations are going as they're supposed to. And how do you manage that? And and my answer is going to be so boring. It's back to time management. You need to time box the looking into the future, because otherwise it will not happen. And it's a very instrumental, boring advice. But I mean, there's really something around putting a placeholder in your calendar on a weekly basis where you do not look at operations, but you know, shut down your phone and look out and do the self-awareness, but also look what's going on around you.
I remember being on a senior leadership course quite a long time ago, and there being the percentages of how strong leaders spend their time as a circle. And I remember, you know, we were all sort of asked to sort of do our own self-reflection on whether we spent time on, you know, administrative things or strategic decision making, and I remember seeing that reflection and taking time to really think should be 70 to 80% of the time of the best and the most effective leaders. And I thought, some way to go on that one. Adamo, were you going to come in?
Yeah, no, I was going to say one of the biggest bad habits leaders have is micromanaging. It's only needed when there are trust issues or performance issues where you do have to keep an eye, but typically there are other ways to manage that. So I think when you're in a VUCA situation and there is a manager who is micromanaging, if you like, you need to almost approach it with a military, a kind of mindset, which is, what is our purpose? What are we here to achieve? What is my role? How long have I got to do it? And repeat that back to the manager till they get sick of you. Because then it's a case of, if you're going outside of this, then we didn't agree to it. Then, do you see what I mean? So this is my role and this is your role. Don't leave the boundaries of this agreement. And it's difficult to manage up, but I would just suggest you just put a military hat on. If I was in the army, what are my instructions? Where do I go? Who do I fight? That's it. And just stay there.
Okay. Can I add to it,
Sure.
Rachel?
Yeah.
Because I think all that being said, if we don't normally micromanage and all of a sudden begin to, it's a warning sign. So I think there's also this important point here around, if we begin to micromanage as leaders, we need to stop and say, why?
Mm-hmm.
Why am I uncomfortable here? What is making me nervous? Why do I need to do this micromanagement? And it's not to say that the solution is right, but there will be a cause behind it it's important to explore and figure out and act upon.
Completely agree. Right, I'm going to move us on to another question that's come in. So, is there a great value in statesmanship, the presence of a leader, and active listening in order to respond to a VUCA context? Does the panel think these are innate in good VUCA leaders, or what could companies do to incubate this? Who'd like to have a crack at that one?
Well, I think, yes, active listening, yes, of course. But another element here is active questioning. If really taking the time to ask not the common question, but the disruptive questions to get other answers than normally. So yes, indeed, active listening, but just as much asking the right questions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think in terms of statesmanship, if you can imagine, whenever the world went through some horrible experience, there was always a figurehead that stood before all of us, whether it was the Queen or the Prime Minister or a general in the army or whatever, or even a parent at home, that would rally everyone together and actually share with them their experience and give them the assurances that things are going to get better. That hope is needed as humans. I think going back to Maslow again, that sense of security needs to be reestablished as quickly as possible, and to help people also see the path forward. So you do need a mixture of like I said, the different hats from the beginning. There is a time for that hat to come on and wear it firmly, because people need that assurance, especially when there's a lot of rumors going around, especially. And people do tend to believe what their leaders tell them. So be careful what you say during those periods. Don't express all of your personal fear, because you will pass it on, and concerns. You will pass it on and they will believe you. So having that statesman approach is critical when it's, obviously at those high emotive states or areas you can't control.
Sorry, Dom. And do you think that that's something that the strongest VUCA leaders just have in them? Or is that something that organizations can really incubate in? It's a tough question, but
curious. I think this is a communication style, by the way. So we're not talking about Superman and Superwoman and super anything. We're talking about the art of communication as a leader. And if you can imagine people like Obama, Oprah Winfrey, Netanyahu, all of the most phenomenally charming leaders that we know of, Clinton, who were great orators, have had training. they've all had communication training. They're good at telling stories, like Ed mentioned earlier. So I think that's where we are, that we need to be able to have the right story packaged at the right time, and this is rapid movement, and be able to deliver it with the right, communication ability. And that ability is learned over time as well.
If I can build, I think one of the regular conversations that I find myself with clients at the moment around this is moving the conversation from one about messaging to one about sentiment. And I've never seen more of a focus on that. And if you think about it, again, our world has changed. There is so much more remote engagement. There is so much more transactional business. There is less rapport. There is less relationship. There is less value in spending time to get to know people in many organizations. And so on that point of active leadership, active listening, excuse me, that's really hard when you don't actually understand the person and you don't have a relationship. And so I think going back to some of those basics, or working out how you can get that sentiment faster, I think is some of the new trends that we'll see in these areas.
Very good. Tanya?
Yeah, it's just to Adam's point, because I really like how you are mentioning all the great speakers of our time and the communication training that they've been through, because I think there's really an important point hidden here. Is also they not only went through training, they also had someone advise them every time they went on stage. And I think that's something we often ignore as leaders, is the need to take communication seriously and not just prepare ourselves in our own company, but actually ask for advice, ask for input, and ask for review before communicating, instead of all the time thinking we need to do it all ourselves. So it's back to the collaboration and asking for advice.
And having buddies, mentors can help as well, I guess.
Sorry, really quickly, I was going to say, now with ChatGPT, we actually have no excuse. You have a buddy.
True.
That's very true. Just before we move into kind of the last question, just to kind of cover off one other question that has been put in the chat. How do leaders conserve their resilience, energy and drive to keep going in the long term? I'll be very interested to hear the answers to this one. What do the panel think?
I mean, I'll start, and I am no way an expert in VUCA compared to other people that I have met in my career. And the most recent person I met is a 4-star general in the military, US military, called General Gustav. And he was responsible for the COVID response, so similar to the example you raised, Ed, on the US side. And I asked him this very question. And he said to me, because I said, how do you cope with all the governors, literally hounding you? How do you cope with Trump saying, you got to do that and you got to do this? And the pharma company saying, you've got to do this and that. And he said, I said, what do you do when you come home? Where do you find the motivation to keep going and the resilience? And he said to me 3 things. The first is, and I totally take this on board myself. The first, he said, is he speaks to a higher power. So you don't have to be religious, but you have to have mindfulness a little bit. If you're not religious, to really go in and calm your mind and cleanse yourself, whether it's yoga, but you have to have somewhere that you can have a quiet space. The second thing he does is, so he helps his mind switch off. The second thing he does is he does a lot of exercise. So he helps his body stay fit, strong, and healthy. And that is really, really important during VUCA times. Your mind and your body have to be optimal. And the very third thing he said to me is he does not worry about what people think. If he believes the purpose is clear, he's doing the right thing. Of course, it's annoying and irritating and frustrating, but he doesn't worry about it. He keeps moving. And I thought, that's really good advice, because half the time we worry about insignificant things, and then we don't look after ourselves as well as we should, right? And I thought, this is making a lot of sense to me. So that obviously will build resilience, and people need to do this at different levels. Some people need to do more of the exercise thing and less of the worrying, and, balance it as it suits you as an individual. But I think all 3 make a ton of sense.
And I think it's back to the self-awareness, but not the self-awareness as of how you act as a leader, but the self-awareness is of how do I feel right now? How is my body and mind responding? And I think there's something, someone once told me that the first thing that happens when we are under too much pressure is that we cannot feel our own needs anymore and we ignore them. So there's also something around, keep eating, keep sleeping, keep going to the toilet when you need to. Those kind of basic needs, responding to them instead of ignoring them, to have, all of you in there with you. And then totally agree with what you're saying, Adam, around the mindfulness.
Ed, you've got some sage advice to throw in here.
Hard to follow, but Adama, you piqued my memory as a former naval officer, and so therefore it would be wrong of me not to bring in a story. But there was a U.S. Navy Admiral, Admiral James Stockdale, who was the first U.S. officer taken as a prisoner of war during the Vietnam War, right at the beginning of the war. And he spoke quite a lot about the Stockdale paradox. And that was recognizing that some of the soldiers, sailors, and airmen and women under his authority were starting to lose faith. They were starting to lose resilience. They were starting to lose belief. And he came up with the paradox, which was, you have to look after yourself, and you have to look after everything that you can to maintain the belief that the right outcome will come. You don't know when it will be, but you need to know what it is that you're looking for. And you need to deal with the cold, hard facts of the day. And again, this goes back to what are the things that I can take control of to make things better, to make progress, and to move forward. And he felt that those are the two things that made the difference between those that were able to sustain, to endure, and be resilient over 7-8 years versus those that weren't. So just a little story, I think, as a build, just to reinforce the points that are shared.
Thank you, Ed. And a good way to conclude our discussion on the Stockdale paradox. So thank you for sharing that story. I can't believe it's almost time, and I don't know where that hour went. It was a fascinating discussion. Thank you very, very much to all three of our panelists, Adama, Tanya and Ed. And thank you to everybody who has dialed in and listened, or those who perhaps listening back to the highlights. Can I just now then hand back over to Daniel, who is our Business Psychology Forum sponsor, chair, to close us out. Daniel.
You can. Wow, what a great conversation. I think what I took from that was just balancing loads of tensions, being curious, but also making decisions, being brave, but also being humble. I think there was a lot of emphasis on learning the lessons and recognizing that although you might be in a unique situation, there will be elements that have happened before. So taking the time to learn those lessons, but also proactively look forward as well and anticipate issues. So lots of powerful themes that came out. We will be collecting those into some key extracts, which we will share with everyone on the call. And I believe we've also recorded, so there'll be a YouTube extravaganza to watch as well. So thank you very much to the panel. Hopefully we'll see you again in January the 17th, when we're going to be looking at the challenges of delivering human-centric AI. So that's the 17th of January, 2024. Look forward to seeing you all again soon. Take care, and let's end the call there.
Thank you.
Thank you.